Hey everyone, welcome back to the Way of the Rosary podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Went, the founder of Way of the Rosary and ChooseLife.com, ChooseLife.com. You can head over there to get yourself rosaries for everyone in the family. But thanks again for joining us for our podcast episode. Today, we're going to be talking about the fruit of the mystery, the scourging at the pillar. The fruit of this mystery is purity. And we're going to be learning about purity from none other than St. Agnes. But purity, I want to take a little bit of a different look, especially because the fruit or the virtue of purity and the scourging at the pillar, at first glance, don't seem totally connected. And so we're going to be talking about purity in a little bit less of an obvious way. Obviously, the first thing we think about when we hear the word purity, we think about physical purity, and we think about chastity and abstinence. And of course, that is one of the ways that St. Agnes exemplified purity and part of the story that we tell of her life, and a beautiful example of that kind of physical purity that is often really looked up to by, especially, I think, younger women. But for those of us um, who maybe don't struggle with physical impurity, what else can we glean? What other fruits can we kind of harvest when we meditate on the scourging at the pillar? And so I want us to think about, and especially because this is what we're told is the fruit that comes from scourging at the pillar. Like, what about that really has anything to do with like sexual purity or physical purity? And I want us to think about purity not only as physical purity, because it's just one of the ways that this fruit shows up in our lives, but also about, I want us to really think about purity in kind of a broader sense. Purity of heart has more to do with kind of a single heartedness than it does about the kind of result of um, our actions. It's a lot more interior than physical purity, which is really actually, when we start to really think about it, just one small aspect of what true purity really is, which has to do with this idea of single heartedness. And so that's what I really want to talk about today, this idea of purity, being pure of heart, of really having such a focus, like purity and focus. Our heart is so pure, it's not defiled with a lot of competing interests, a lot of competing loves. And I think this is something that we all need to grow in, even if we are kind of out of the season of life where sexual temptation is a big deal for us. We now have, this grown-up world where there are so many things competing for our attention, competing for our heart, and our job, the work that we have to do, this ongoing work, is continuing to refine our focus and to kind of keep our hearts clear of the clutter and the distractions and all of the things that are competing within our lives for that first place, that center spot in our heart, which should be reserved for Christ alone. And this idea, this either like broader look at purity or like a different way of looking at purity, thinking about it as single-heartedness, we can also think about purity of our intentions. And that's purity of our intentions is something that comes out of this single-heartedness. And like physical purity that we see very specifically in St. Agnes is, again, like one of those things that comes out of single-heartedness. And this idea of purity of intention is really about everything in our life, all of our actions, all of our desires, everything that kind of comes out of us in terms of work or speech, all of that comes from this single intention to love the Lord and make him loved. And that was, this is the lesson that we really learn from St. Agnes, this incredible focus. And we'll get to St. Agnes. We'll talk a little bit more about her life. But one of these, a couple of other examples in just expanding your thinking about the fruit of purity. We can also think about purity in terms of purity of heart in suffering. Again, like having that focus. And this directly helps us to understand the connection between the scourging at the pillar and purity itself, and tying in St. Agnes. In suffering, when we have this very singular focus of loving the Lord and making him loved, then in suffering, we have the same kind of MO, the same modus operandi. We want to, in our suffering, love the Lord. How is this suffering helping me to love the Lord more, uniting myself with the passion of the Lord, specifically the scourging at the pillar, perhaps? How am I uniting myself to my beloved in this suffering? And then how am I kind of shining that forth? How am I in the world kind of being that reflection of who Christ is and his love for those around me in my suffering? So, loving Christ and making him loved to those around us, especially in suffering, is something that um, becomes more obvious, maybe is a way to say it, or more just spectacle is the wrong word. I'm trying to think of a word. But in our suffering, sometimes people are paying attention. Um, there might be more people in our life who are helping us to kind of work through this season. There's other people who are involved in the, whatever grief or struggle there is. There oftentimes, not always, sometimes suffering is very, very hidden. But sometimes, or oftentimes, I think in our suffering, especially when we suffer well, people take notice. When you have a good life and you have a good demeanor, a good outlook, a good, positive attitude, a smile on your face, nobody bats an eye. Nobody is going to give it a second thought, and they chalk it up to wonderful circumstances. Good luck. You are so lucky, they might say. And so, even though you are loving the Lord, you almost don't have the opportunity as much. And in suffering, we have this incredible opportunity to kind of show people something that they don't expect. They don't expect someone to have a smile on their face. And that's one of the things that onlookers said about St. Agnes, is that through her suffering, she beamed with this incredibly beautiful joy that everyone around her took notice of. A little teaser again, I won't get too much into the story. I also wanted to think about another aspect, which is kind of the distractedness. So, thinking about like purity in our attachments, or detachment as a form of purity. It is, in a sense, impure in an unfocused and kind of cluttered way to have a lot of attachments in our heart. St. Agnes famously said, Jesus Christ is my only spouse. And in our own hearts, especially if we are married, we have an earthly spouse, but still our heart still has to remain centered on Christ. And is he our only spouse? Can we say those same words as St. Agnes? No, not exactly. But we have almost a challenge that religious sisters or virgins like St. Agnes don't have the same challenge of having an earthly beloved, but also our heavenly beloved who needs to be at the center of our heart, and making sure that our earthly beloved never takes that center spot. And that's just, a spouse is one example of an attachment of things that might kind of threaten to overtake the Lord as the center of our life. Children, of course, especially in those early years of parenting when their needs are so many, and most of your time and energy throughout the day is spent meeting those needs, that can very easily kind of inch the Lord out of the center, and our children become the center of our life. And so, children, um, other things, big things such as work or passions or hobbies, those things that we really, really love to do, we can become so in love with those things that those also kind of threaten to edge the Lord out of the center of our life. We can have small attachments, attachments to our phones, attachments to certain comforts, or certain distractions in our lives. There are lots of little things, and we'll talk a little bit more about it when we start getting really practical at the end of the episode. But those kind of attachments are the things that clutter up our heart and don't allow us to have this single hearted, pure focus on loving the Lord and making him loved. And St. Agnes was such an incredible witness in her life. And she was one of the first, or among the first kind of generation of Christian martyrs in the early church. She was born in the 200s, died in the 300s, and died under the Emperor Diocletian, who is famous for the persecution of Christians. And St. Agnes loved the Lord so incredibly much that she decided to devote herself entirely to him. She, like so many of the saints we know, came from a very affluent family. She was, very wealthy, very just lived a life of luxury and lavishness. And in addition to her high status in society, she also was incredibly beautiful. And so she had this long line of very, I don't know, sort of well qualified suitors, so to speak, very wealthy, very well off from, other high stations in society, that would have all been good matches for a social climber. But there was another set of stairs that St. Agnes was intent on climbing, because her heart was singularly focused on Christ, her beloved. St. Agnes had an incredible focus, an incredible single heartedness. I was trying to think of a different word, but I think that really does sum it up the most perfectly. And this is the example that we need to learn from St. Agnes, I think, most importantly. Like, yes, sexual purity is important, and it's a big part of St. Agnes's story. She had one suitor in particular, the governor's son, was the one who kind of ratted her out. She not let slip because she wasn't about to really hide it, but Christians were not, I mean, because of Christian persecution, they were not outward with their faith. But with one particular suitor, St. Agnes was extremely blunt, and she let him know that she would not be marrying anybody because her heart belonged to Christ, with the words that I shared earlier. And she said, Christ is my only spouse. And that enraged him so much. He told on her to the governor, who tried to persuade her with many gifts and, just an incredible bribe to deny the Lord. And St. Agnes, of course, wouldn't. And the governor stripped her naked and threw her into a brothel, where his intention was to destroy her purity so that she'd give up these silly Christian ways. Excuse me. And instead, something miraculous happened. The Lord preserved her. And the one man who, a Roman soldier, who would have violated her, was suddenly struck blind and then healed by the prayers of St. Agnes. Excuse me again. Excuse me, tickle in my throat. There's a handful of miraculous stories surrounding the death of St. Agnes. Eventually, she was murdered by the Roman government for the crime of being a Christian. Even on her way to certain death, St. Agnes continued to beam with incredible beauty and joy because she knew she was going to see her beloved. She knew that none of the suffering that she was about to certainly experience would take away and, in fact, would add to the joy that she was about to experience getting face to face with her beloved. That single-hearted focus on the face of our beloved is what allows us to suffer well. It's what allows us to move the other things that threaten to distract us or threaten to kind of edge the Lord out of the center of our life. It is having that singular focus on the face of our beloved beaming at us with love that we will experience on the day of our coronation as saints if we can live a life of suffering well, live a life of loving Christ and making him loved. And all of this, you know, might feel a little bit easier said than done because there are every single day so many things that threaten to distract us from this single-hearted focus. And even when we feel like, I've got it, good, I'm so focused on the Lord, I love nothing more than Jesus Christ, then life changes and different seasons come. And so this is the continual work of our lives, the continual work to refocus every single day, every hour of our lives, to refocus on our love of Christ and allow him to take that center place in our life so that he can love us, and his love is what fills our heart and then overflows into all of the other important aspects of our life, and especially the parts of our vocation that are very important and take so much of our time and energy and attention. And so practically, how can we really do this? Well, I think one of the very foundational practices when it comes to kind of breaking attachments or growing in this idea of detachment, and that is fasting. And as we're recording this, we're in the season of Lent. And so it's a perfect time to perhaps kind of take stock of our heart and to really think about what are the other things where maybe they are, or maybe they're not yet, um, or, they haven't taken over the center spot in our life. But we have these things that threaten to do that, that maybe they have in other seasons, or that if we don't kind of keep an eye on those things, they can kind of take over. What are the things that we're at risk of being overly attached to? Can we fast from them, or are there aspects? If it is your vocation, if it is your husband, or if it's your children, obviously we can't fast from any of them. But if we very intentionally fast for them in a way that is a focus on Christ, so something like adoration, Maybe we're sacrificing time and we're giving that to our Eucharistic Lord, and we're praying for our spouse, we're praying for our children. It again kind of allows those relationships to flow out of Jesus's Eucharistic heart, of that center place, the true center place in our heart. A daily examination of conscience is another really helpful way. And thinking through kind of a traditional examination of conscience is definitely going to help us to find those areas of selfishness or distrust. And we can maybe think about how those things, what are they really rooted in? And how are they an attachment? Or how are they pulling you away from your single hearted focus on Jesus? But more than just an examination of conscience, as in like a preparation for the sacrament of confession, think about a daily examine and look back through your day and ask yourself, where did I neglect prayer? What were the other things that I said yes to when I said no to prayer time, or no to serving the Lord, or to doing something that the Lord has asked you to do or prompted you to do? Thinking about, the competition in our heart. I think all of these things, I think that's really what it is, more than like threatening to overcome, really thinking about them as like a competitive thing. All of these things are constantly competing for our love and our attention, our time, the space in our heart. And if we're not careful to keep them right ordered, then those things can get very disordered and we put something else in that center place. And then our whole life kind of gets off kilter. And this daily examine and asking ourselves, what things are competing for my love? What things are competing with the Lord for my heart today? Then that might help us to think about what things might be a little bit disordered or competing for that place. Another practical thing is scripture, to really pour ourselves into scripture and spiritual reading, and spending that focused time with the Lord really helps us to reorient and to focus and to keep the Lord at the center. His scripture is his words to us. When we feel like our prayer time is maybe dry, or we're struggling to hear the Lord, reading scripture is one of the best ways to really hear the Lord's voice. Maybe specifically starting with Psalm 51:10, create in me a clean heart, O God, and thinking about that, a steadfast spirit, one that is perseverant and faithful and stands up in the hard times, stands up in the face of struggle and toil. That's the kind of heart that I want. And the Lord who gave you that desire longs to fulfill it for you. We've said that so many times, and it's so easy for us to forget. But when Christ is at the center of our lives and our heart is singularly, single heartedly focused on Him, that desire will ultimately, inevitably, always, faithfully be fulfilled. And of course, I'll leave you with one last practical way to really grow in this gift of purity, in single heartedness. And of course, that is the sacrament of confession and the Eucharist. By steeping ourselves in that sacramental grace, by breaking ourselves of detachment through the gift of penance and confession, that is going to allow us to like clean the clutter out of our life to remain focused on the Lord. And frequenting the Eucharist just inflames that fire in our hearts for more and more of the Lord. And it's kind of like a flywheel. It makes us burn and desire more of the Lord. And the more we desire the Lord, the more we fill our hearts with Him, the more we desire it. It just becomes this beautiful filling in our hearts. And it's easier for us to kind of order the other things in our life when we have our Eucharistic Lord so ever present in our daily and weekly routines. All right, guys, thank you once again for joining us. Thanks for, joining in this discussion of single-heartedness. If you've enjoyed this and you want to have more of a discussion about this, if you want to learn more about the fruits of the rosary, more about the mysteries of the rosary, if you'd like to learn more about the promises of the rosary, we did a whole series on all of that. We're in the middle of our fruit series, but we deeply dove into the mysteries in another series. And the year before that, we spent the entire year on the promises of the rosary, all within our Way of the Rosary community. And on top of the beautiful series that we've built, we also have a vibrant, dynamic community of Catholic women who are joining together on a daily basis to pray with and for each other, to talk about these ideas and to really journey with one another along this way of the rosary, and to make prayer not just like something that we do, a box that we check each day, but really a living, breathing, and growing relationship in our lives. All right, guys, we will see you later. God bless.